It's nice, Katie. It's nice to be able to have this conversation with you. I think uh, I actually think this is a harder topic than the last one that Liam and I engaged in taking care of others and healthy ways of doing that. This one is a more difficult one, at least for me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So, I think it's one I'm excited to talk about today. I found that um, even as we prepared for this, it was almost a good kind of form of accountability for me of where do I need to improve this, to continue to take care of myself so that I'm healthy to take care of others. Um, and I think as we have this conversation today, I will let you know that actually my daughter is sitting in the room listening too. So I feel like there's this extra layer of accountability, um, that she will be like, "Oh yeah, Dad, that would be good if you did that." So yeah. So what is this topic like for you to dive into right now and converse about?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic to dive into. And I think, especially just right now, with, everything happening in the world, and maybe whatever's happening in everyone's personal lives, it's a important topic and it's a hard topic. And that's what I hear when you say that. So it feels like for me, it means a lot to be talking about this today, because it is so important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I hope that we all walk away with from our conversation is, um, I guess, a sense of hope that this is a process that we get to engage in, that learning to care for ourselves in order to care for others, is takes some time, and it's a rhythm that we need to get into, and also acknowledging that sometimes those rhythms need to shift a bit as life changes for ourselves, and society, and knowing that as we do take care of ourselves, it isn't a selfish thing.
Yeah.
It can be selfish taken to certain extents, but it's not a selfish thing. It actually, it's really good for those we're closest with, and those that we interact with in culture and society.
Yeah, and I kind of want to add, it's not a selfish thing, but it is a hard thing. And even, I wonder if this fits for you, Pete. But even as like a therapist or a mental health clinician, just because I'm a mental health clinician doesn't mean that like I don't also struggle with taking care of myself. I think it's something that's hard for everybody.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's the kind of the classic piece of, you might have all the information and know what's best, but
Yeah.
the actual following through with it is pretty difficult
Hmm.
at
Yeah.
times. So so when we think about self-care, what how might this largely be understood in society, in our culture these days?
Yeah, when I think about self care in our society and culture these days, I think about like Instagram and social media, and kind of like that stereotypical way of taking care of yourself. So maybe like someone might think about like lighting a scented candle, or doing a face mask, or getting a massage, or some way where they're like doing like a small thing to take care of themselves. That's kind of what I think about self care when I think about what society thinks about self care,
Mhm.
and maybe what social media tells us self care is.
Right, and a lot of it seems to be kind of in the vein of a lot of like physical self-care. So maybe along the, like, a massage or exercise, or even vacation, where we're thinking about doing something different
Yeah, or
we
like
might pursue.
buying a new piece of clothing, or treating yourself to bubble tea, or yeah, I agree with you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's these things that were almost marketed to us, and also knowing that the self-care business is a multi billion dollar business. Um, but a lot of these things, yes, they are good, but on their own, they're very temporary. And so we're hoping that somehow we walk out of participating in these things and we feel what? What do you think?
Yeah, I think when we participate in things like that, we're hoping to feel like relaxed, some sort of like escape from maybe the hard things going on in our life, um, feeling a break from difficult situations that we're going through, um, maybe hoping that we feel more refreshed when we come back, a better sense of clarity, maybe more joyful or happier, more at peace. Um, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's these fairly large expectations that we have of when I participate in this, I hope that I will feel more at peace afterwards.
Yeah.
I hope I will feel more relaxed or have more clarity. What do you think actually might get in the way at times of of actually achieving that, of actually walking away from something and feeling more peace or clarity that actually lasts for,
Hmm.
for a while?
Well, I have a little bit of like a personal story, if that's okay. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a few months ago, I was going through a hard time, and so what I would do is I would go to work every day, and I would come home, and my form of self care was reading, and specifically romantic comedies. Had to be a romantic comedy. So I would go to work, come home, read a book, and it was like my way of escaping whatever hard things were going on. And that kind of felt like the only thing I could really do for maybe a month or so of just reading and trying to escape the hard things. And then what I noticed is I was starting to feel like anxiety in my body, and I was starting to feel like stressed or nervous about other things. And so whatever hard things were happening, they were kind of like accumulating or getting worse, or things were becoming more overwhelming. And so my form of self-care of reading, it wasn't enough. And I kind of got to this point where I was like, okay, I've been escaping maybe what the actual root problem is. And now I need to look at, okay, how am I really doing? Um, I'm not doing great right now. Why am I not doing great right now? Like, what are the things that I need to reflect on and sit with and improve in my life so that I can live more healthily or in a
Mm-hmm.
more healthy way? Yeah, so I think that's an example of like, I was trying to do something good for myself, and maybe reading and going home and escaping was like the only thing that I had energy to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it got to the point where it wasn't enough, and
Right.
and then it was kind of like, okay, what now? Yeah.
And I think what I hear you saying in there is actually the reading in itself is a very positive thing. And maybe even the just kind of being detached from the struggle that you had at the time, those things that were concerning, that being a little bit detached from that through reading is actually a good thing and served you well to
Yeah.
carry on the next days. It sounds like it got to a point where in your own reflection you were like, actually, this isn't working anymore. So it worked for a time, but through the process, you asked yourself, like, this doesn't even fit anymore. It sounds
Yeah.
like something, almost something deeper that you needed to address.
Yeah.
And
And
I know you mentioned, even as we've talked about in the past, that a lot of these things that we might do, whether it's massages, whether it's I would say for myself, even the exercise, it's good. But for a certain amount of time, if I use it as escape, or if we use it as an escape and a detachment from things, we actually just kind of perpetuate a cycle of still stepping into the same stress.
yeah. And one thing that I noticed with my loved ones or people in my life, this is like a common thing where sometimes we have really hard things going on in our lives, and the best way that we know how to take care of ourselves is like to go home and to watch a TV show and kind of turn your brain off, or to go home and watch hockey. I know you like to watch hockey, Pete. Or to go home and like have a bath or whatever. It's something that I see a lot, because sometimes whatever is happening in our lives, like it feels like too much. And sometimes the only thing we feel like we can do is kind of turn our brain off.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Which is interesting. It does maybe turn our brain off, but then when we have to turn our brain back on,
Yeah.
it becomes pretty overwhelming to step back into things, right? It's quite a just a contrast in way of living. So you talked about an awareness. Why is an awareness of ourselves and what we're experiencing? Um, why do you believe that's important, and why is it important to recognize that?
I think it's important because otherwise you're going to stay in that cycle of escapism or disconnecting. And if you aren't actually, reflecting and becoming aware of what is actually happening in your body and in your mind,
Hmm.
then it's just going to be like a vicious cycle. And I think that's how things like burnout happen.
Yeah.
And when you're in a place of burnout, um, it's kind of like where I don't want to use the phrase like hit rock bottom, but that's kind of the only thing that's coming to me right now. But sometimes, yeah, it kind of feels like you get to a place or dig yourself into a hole that's hard to get out of.
Yeah.
And that's a place that I'm guessing not a lot of people want to be in, if anybody.
No, I think that's a lot of the things that we engage in, that we think are self care are actually to avoid those
Yeah,
things, right? I think we all have a natural fear of it,
yeah,
and for good reason. And when we talk about that awareness, um, you know, I wonder at times how, I'll use the word scary, it is to ask ourselves those questions
yeah,
and to really acknowledge where we're at, and ask ourselves, what am I feeling right now? What am I going through, and what is contributing to this, that actually I have ownership over, despite if anybody else around me is going to change. What do I really need to take ownership of here?
yeah.
And that other piece too, when you talked about acknowledging maybe the unhealthy patterns, it's very easy for us to acknowledge the things that are that are hard, or maybe that we've done wrong, or we don't feel like we're doing right. How important is it also for us to acknowledge the things that we have done well, and the ways in which we have attempted to take care of ourselves?
I think it's really important, because going back to my example of reading as a form of escaping, I still think that the small self-care things that we do, like reading, or the more surface level self-care things, they still play a really important role. And I think it's like your body trying to take care of yourself and trying to protect yourself.
Mhm.
So it does serve a really important role.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I think too, shame and guilt, which often comes from a place of, when we don't feel good about what we've done, or how the rhythm we're in and the routine we're in. Um, to contrast that also with a message of, wow, I actually naturally took care of myself here.
Hmm. Yeah.
I actually do have a desire to be in a healthy place. And my intention behind this was to not be overwhelmed,
Yeah.
right? Which is whether it's reading, whether it is something like watching hockey, or exercise.
Hmm.
Um, and so we've just talked about kind of, here's the hard parts of it. Here's kind of the messages that we receive of self-care looks like doing this, paying for this. Um, and sometimes I know you mentioned it over the last little while that some of these things just seem kind of surface,
Hmm.
and like they're missing something else. What do you think that those things are missing?
I think that they're missing things like actually taking the time to slow down and check in and ask yourself, like, how am I really doing? Um, I think that's a really hard question to ask
Hmm.
because sometimes Pete, we don't want to know the answer to that question. And I think, going back to the example, the personal story that I shared, I think that if I would have asked myself that, I wouldn't have liked the answer. Um, so I think actually taking time to slow down and check in with yourself, reflecting with others, maybe asking for feedback from people that you feel really safe with and you trust.
Hmm.
Sometimes like journaling can be really helpful. It's like write
Hmm.
down your thoughts and feelings. And we kind of talked a little bit about like patterns. And so I think getting to a place where you can actually see a pattern in yourself and name a pattern, and see kind of where you are at in the cycle that you're at. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that is. I think even hearing you say it to me right now, Kady, has I feel validated in the times that I've had where I've been like, okay, what is happening for me right now? You just kind of normalized it
Mm,
a little bit, and that awareness is so important. The also what I hear you saying is, how do we make this more holistic rather than just kind of physically taking care of ourselves? How do we step into places uh, where we are taking care of ourselves emotionally, spiritually, physically, and relationally?
yeah.
You mentioned talking to somebody, maybe a friend. How do we intentionally go about setting up times with friends to say, actually, I would like to discuss a few things with you that are going on in my life? And maybe the second piece of that is also clarifying what the expectations are that you have of that person as
Yeah.
you share those things. Because it might be overwhelming for them, but to say what I need and what I think I need, I'm not totally sure. I think it's actually okay to be not totally sure about those things. Say what I think I need is someone to listen right now. And I'd love to hear a reflection from you as you hear what I'm sharing, just what you're hearing. And yeah, so to be intentional about the conversations, whether it's with a friend, whether it's around, if you have family, whether it's around a dinner table with a partner, um, to say, hey, tonight when we have dinner, can we be intentional about what we're talking about even? How do you think that even being intentional and saying this is the purpose of this, instead of just hoping it'll happen, how do you think that will kind of facilitate more self-care and relational care?
I think I think that it makes a big difference. Um, Being intentional with what you want to do and what you ask for, yeah, makes a huge difference. And I want to acknowledge being intentional is hard. Like
Yes.
these are not, the things that Pete and I are talking about are not easy things.
No, no. I think that they're even a bit, it's a bit nerve wracking at times, even to approach a friend to say, I would like to have an intentional conversation.
And what when you say like it feels nerve wracking, like I'm curious for you, like what comes up for you if you were to do that?
I think there's a hope embedded in that of that this person can be that listener.
Mm,
Um, and so it's also acknowledging that what are my expectations of the individual, and to be able to say to them, like, or even just acknowledge for myself, how tightly am I holding those expectations?
yeah.
So can I hold them loosely, um, and and maybe it can actually be a reciprocal conversation. And actually being intentional, not just with the conversations with friends about things that are difficult, but being intentional with how do we get together and actually celebrate parts of life, right? How do we, I think we do that when there's milestones. Um, and even if we celebrate birthdays with somebody, how do we use that time intentionally to say, we are here to celebrate your life. We are here to actually say, this is what I see in your life that is so good. Um, you know, I think this is a big part of Take a Hike and what we practice every day. You just came back from a kayak trip. How did you experience intentional conversations where it was a sharing of even gratitude and acknowledging what you see, the good things you see in each other?
I experienced it as really refreshing because there was this one moment late at night on the first night where I was asking the students a question about belonging. And sometimes in the class when I ask reflective questions, like there's a lot of squirming and I want to get out of here. And it was different this reflective question because everyone was listening and everyone was really mindful and present. And it was probably one of the most thought-provoking reflections that we shared together. And so it felt, for lack of a better word, it felt good. It felt really.
Yeah. So you've experienced that when you ask those questions, there's a lot of squirming. Maybe people feel uncomfortable with them because there's more meaning and maybe a different degree of vulnerability in there. And you could easily avoid not asking that question and asking something about even the trip you're on. What did you do to prepare well for where you are now? How come you didn't ask that question? What kind of brought you to a place of asking the question and being intentional with a question about belonging?
I asked that question because a lot of them, it's their first year at Take a Hike. And I do individual sessions with all of them. And so I kind of know them on another level. And I know that some of them don't feel like they belong. And I know that some of them do feel like they belong. And so I was curious to ask that question because I think one of the big parts of Trip is the theme of belonging. And so I was curious that, like, after preparing all week for a kayak trip and paddling out to a new place and cooking dinner together and spending time in nature, I was curious if their feelings of belonging were the same, or if they were different, or if new things were coming up. And yeah, it was a pretty deep conversation. Yeah.
And I wonder, Kady, if there's a big part of you too that actually really trusts that innately these young people want to feel belonging, and that actually we as humans want to feel that. And therefore being able to express it and actually learn to express it, because some of us might not even have the language of how to express what this feels like, what belonging feels like.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when we engage in a conversation around it, both our heart and our mind are opened up to this idea of like, wow, there's words that I can put to this good feeling I have. Or on the contrary, there's words that I can put to this feeling that feels negative, that doesn't fit right.
Yeah.
And being able to express that is also quite relieving for some. Right? So yeah, being intentional about asking questions about the conversations we get into. And I think part of that being intentional is actually front loading with those that we're in conversation with. The next part is, so that's in relationships that we can be intentional with our conversation. How can we be intentional with times that we have alone, maybe times that we have in silence.
I think it's about being honest with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When we ask the questions of how am I doing really, actually taking a moment of your day to acknowledge whatever that is. And,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're not doing well, like that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're having a great day, that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being honest and truthful with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I have, as Rachel mentioned in her introduction, one thing that I do love is I love road cycling. And I love road cycling on my own. I also love it with a good friend. And I have a friend who I cycle with. And Scott and I we have a verbal agreement that there's times we will talk while we ride, but there's actually a lot of times where we are just good with silence as we're together. Um, and in both when I ride with myself and when I'm with him, more so when I ride with myself, I notice a very clear pattern of what I go through emotionally. And I leave the house, and for the first probably 8 to 10 kilometers, it's actually probably it's a positive thing that I'm alone because I'm extremely irritable. Um, and nobody would know it as they were driving by or riding by or walking by, but I do feel this, and it's the same pattern every time. I'm very irritable. I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed at things in the world. And then I notice as I get past that 8 to 10 kilometers and into the next 10, I I start to reflect on all those things were hard and that were annoying me differently. I start to actually see and reflect on possibilities of how to navigate them differently, or how do I is there somebody I need to reach out to, or do I need to change some of my own behavior, whether it's some of the things in the world that are overwhelming me. And then as I go into the next 20 or 30 kilometers, after that, the creativity
Mm.
starts to really flow. And I actually feel a deeper love and gratitude for the things that are really important in my life. And so as much as I do not like the first, you know, 8 to 10 kilometers, um, because I know what I go through and I don't like being annoyed, it's also a good part of the process for me. And so that alone time is very mindful for me. And I use that time very intentionally to think about certain things.
Mm.
And I actually walk back into the house afterwards. Um, I think if Kristen and the kids were to say anything about it, they would say I was quite different. Um, so if I'm ever encouraged to go on a bike ride, um, I know that I'm probably not coming across as a very positive person. So, Kady, if you ever encouraged me to go on a bike ride, I'll know
Yeah.
what the message is there. So,
I love that story.
yeah.
And Pete, I'm wondering if I can share a little bit more about, why self-care can feel, or caring for ourselves can feel really hard.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. And you and I were talking yesterday about sometimes like the messages that we get from society and social media and Instagram. You touched on this a little bit, but taking care of yourself can feel like something you're not allowed to do, or it feels like selfish. Um, um, and that those are things that can kind of get in the way of taking care of yourself and having that intentional time with somebody else or with yourself.
Mhm.
Like you might come from a culture where like you were taught you weren't allowed to take care of yourself,
Mhm.
or um, if you're a man, like toxic masculinity, you might be like, oh, I need to just suck it up and like carry on through my day. I'm not allowed to like feel things or have a hard time. Um, yeah, I think it's just really important to acknowledge that when we talk about self-care, it's a hard thing, and taking care of yourself is hard. And um, when we have internal messages too of like maybe you have an internal message of like I'm not worthy of self-care,
Mhm.
or I don't deserve self-care.
Yeah.
Um, like my life's not that hard. Like I should be able to handle it.
Right.
So I guess, yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot. And I think being able to take care of ourselves and to be intentional with other people and ourselves, it's actually quite a privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah, it totally is. And I really appreciate what you said there, Kady, and in having really reflecting on what are the things that are getting in the way, whether those are messages, whether those are ways that we were raised, um, and and not that any of these things are necessarily bad. If we were raised in a certain way, maybe our parents were trying their best, but they knew no other way,
Yeah.
um, culturally as well. And so, how do we really take time to reflect on some of those things, the things that are influencing us? And a big one is our expectations. Sometimes it might be around work, and expressing these things to a supervisor is, you know, for me, it's actually a bit scary. Um,
I was going to say it's scary for me too. And it's funny because you're my supervisor.
but as we make it a part of our lives and a part of our culture, and I would say how you and I interact, um, I believe we've made it a part of your and my interaction, where it's you understand that this is part of my process, and I understand that it's part of your process, and um, and we have that unique and um, that unique opportunity to become better together
Yeah.
and to work through different seasons, knowing that a season will end. Sometimes it'll take longer, but the really clarifying a lot of those expectations. I know that I put pretty high. I have some unrealistic expectations of myself at times, and sometimes when I've been able to express those to supervisors that I have, and they just kind of look at me like, I never said that. I never told you to do that, or I know that's not what I expected you to do. Um, it feels really freeing to be able to share those things. Um, and for us to be able to, my hope is, Kady, and I think this is a tough one to achieve, but I think it's good work to do. Is that we're self-care is not something that happens outside of work. Is that how do we actually have going home be a place where we can be fresh as well? And sometimes there's this expectation of like when I'm at work, I got to give everything, and when I go home, that's when I relax. How can work also become a place where we do become inspired by the people we're around, by how we interact? Um, how do we be gracious with each other, patient with each other, clarify expectations, and encourage each other to continue to do good work, and also to go home and do good work there,
Yeah.
right? But as you said, that's hard to do. But I think it's a process.
Yeah. I mean, I think anything in life that's hard is a process. Yeah.
Yes, and totally worth doing.
A worthy
And
process.
yeah, and you said something about how we're all deserving of self care, and something that I read a long time ago that constantly I'm reminded of is a short statement that says, "We are all deserving of care, regardless of whether we're in crisis or not."
Yeah.
That sometimes there's this sense of like, oh, they're fine. I don't really need to see how they're doing. But actually, how can this just be a regular part of our time with people and our time with ourselves?
Yeah.
Um, that I don't have to do these things just when I'm in crisis or just when I'm stressed. They can actually be part of everyday life,
Yeah.
right? Others deserve it, as do I,
Yeah.
in order to be healthy and to have a healthy society.
Yeah.
So, Kady, is there anything you want to even reiterate as we wrap this up?
Well, you know me, I always have things to say, so yes. Yeah, I guess I really appreciated this conversation, and I guess I want to say for anyone who is listening or watching, um, the people who have really hard jobs or who are parents, people who don't feel like they deserve to take care of themselves, people who come from cultures where maybe they feel like they're not allowed to take care of themselves, people who are
Mm,
looking at Instagram or TikTok or social media and seeing, other people's like quote unquote perfect lives. Um, just that we see you, and
mm,
yeah, you're worthy of self-care and taking care of yourself. And I also want to say, with everything happening in the world right now, um, the many things, sometimes it can feel like the world's on fire, and how do I take care of myself when the world's on fire? And I almost think that that's when it's the most important time to take care of ourselves and take care of the people around us. Yeah.
mhm. As we wrap up, Kady, and then I'll let Rachel jump back in here. I actually had a bit of a lump in my throat when you said "we see you," and I just think how there's. I felt that because I think that's what we all really want and desire. We want to be seen. We want to be heard and have that sense of belonging. And acknowledging that as a way of caring for ourselves is super important. So how do we go about seeing each other and being gracious as we do so? Thanks, Kady, for sharing today. I personally always love these conversations and doing this journey with you. Um, and yeah, you're relentless in it, which is why you're the perfect person to have this conversation and have people hear from you.
Thanks, Pete. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Rachel.
Thank you, you too. That was a great discussion. I wrote down we're all deserving of care, whether we are in crisis or not, on a post-it, and I plan to keep it on my desk because I just thought that was such a lovely sentiment and just a really great way to summarize everything that you spoke about today. So thank you so much for that. Thank you as well to everyone who has taken the time to join us today. As I mentioned, there will be a recording sent to all registrants within the next few days of this webinar, and it will also be hosted on our YouTube channel. We want to thank you again for taking the time to join us on this important conversation during Mental Health Month. We hope you'll continue this conversation with your loved ones and make mental health priority, not only this month, but every month. We hope this will be the first of many webinars presented by our incredible subject matter experts here at Take a Hike. So as you leave today's webinar, please take the time to fill out the short exit survey and let us know what you thought of today's presentation. We want to make them even better in the future if that's possible. If you're interested in learning more about Take a Hike, whether it's how to get involved, learn more about our programs, attend future events, or how to donate, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly at philanthropy@takeahikefoundation.org or at www.takeahikefoundation.org. Thank you so very much for spending your lunch hour with us, and I hope that you have a great day.